This is a 70-year-old Villiers engine, and in this video I'm going to be fully restoring it. I've just acquired it from somebody who told me that it doesn't run. It has oil in it, which is a good sign, and the only other test I've done is to pull it over by hand, and it doesn't seem to have any compression at all. Clearly, the engine oil is very clean, almost too clean. What I need to do is remove all of the components so that I can access the cylinder head and remove it if necessary. This rust looks ominous. With the engine cowling removed, it's clear to see that there is a bit of damage to the flywheel. 3 of the cooling fins have been broken off, and also there is some fairly excessive orange rust inside the cover itself. I've also taken a look inside the cylinder bore with an inspection camera, and it looks like it's full of rust. So I'm going to go straight ahead and remove the cylinder head so that I can clean it out in there before I go any further. The rust inside here definitely looks like coffee grounds. Luckily it's nice and dry, so I can very easily clean this out. You may have already noticed, but the piston does not have any carbon on it at all, neither does the cylinder head or the valves. This is very interesting because it likely means that somebody has already dismantled the engine, or at least the top half, and then put it back together again, but never run it. It leaves the question, why not? Maybe they couldn't get compression. So I'm going to conduct a leak down test to find out where the problems lie. As you can see from the cylinder leak down test, it has failed spectacularly. So where is it actually leaking from? The intake valve? The exhaust valve? The rings? Well, yes, it looks like it is the intake and the exhaust valve because there is significant air leaking out of both the exhaust port and the intake port. With a bit of luck, the valves just need to be relapped so they can create a good seal. I'm now going to dismantle the entire engine, get it cleaned up, painted, and then reassembled. Underneath the flywheel we have the ignition system, which is also where the points and condenser are, and these will need to be set up properly when the engine is reassembled. It does look quite clean in here, but that's probably because of the fresh oil. There is still a bit of sludge in the bottom of the sump, but nothing unexpected. The first component to be removed is the governor gear. This is followed by the connecting rod and piston. Note the oil dipper, which is integrated into the casting of the big end. The dipper splashes oil and lubricates all the components when the engine is running. When the engine is reassembled, these two timing dots will have to be aligned on the crankshaft and the camshaft. Unlike modern engines, the camshaft is actually on its own shaft, which needs to be pressed out of the crankcase. Once that has been removed, the camshaft simply slides out. The final few components are removed. This includes the governor shaft, the valve tappets, and the bearings. The bearings will be replaced with new ones. That is the main part of the engine disassembled. Next, the cylinder head also needs to be disassembled, and then after that, all the components can be cleaned thoroughly. The disassembly of the head involves removing the valves and the rocker. After a quick inspection, it doesn't look like the valves have been lapped in recently. Also, the valve seats are looking incredibly rusty. So I'll address this issue when I rebuild the head. I'm using a hot degreaser washer to remove all of the grime and oil from the components. I'm using the sandblaster to remove all of the rust and to clean up the head. I'm going to hone the bore because clearly it does not look good. Also, by honing it, it should allow the piston rings to seat. After honing a bore, it is imperative to clean it thoroughly. I actually did this off camera, but I did clean it with soapy water and then with brake cleaner. To prevent all of the components from rusting, I'm giving them a good coat of etch primer. I won't actually do the top coat though until the engine is fully reassembled. I've inspected all of the parts and I'm incredibly happy with most of them, so I can now start the reassembly. When reassembling engines, I like to use the Permatex reassembly oil. Now the piston rings do look brand new, and they probably are because I think somebody has actually rebuilt the engine, it's just they never succeeded with getting it running. So I'm just going to give them a good clean and also check the ring gaps and hopefully reuse them. After checking all the rings, they were all within spec and I can now refit them to the piston. Although I did manage to find a gasket set for this engine, I couldn't find a sump gasket, which is strange. So I'm having to make my own here, but it's not a problem because it's not really too tricky. All you need is some gasket paper and a hammer. With the gasket made, I'm applying some Permatex high-tack sealant, and then the sump can be fitted to the crankcase. Now to rectify the issue which was most likely the reason why the previous owner never got it running. I'm simply using some fine lapping compound, and it basically just grinds the valve into its seat, and this creates an airtight seal. Without a good seal, the engine can't create compression, and without compression it can't complete its combustion cycle. You can see that nice silver ring on the valve face. With both the valves lapped in, the cylinder head is then cleaned thoroughly. I'm using some brake cleaner, and it's then reassembled. The two push rods are fitted, and these basically sit into the valve tappets. As the camshaft rotates, the valve tappets push up on the push rods, and that in turn moves the rocker, which will then open and close the valves. As mentioned, I do have a gasket set, so I'm fitting a brand new head gasket. From this point onwards, it is just a reverse procedure of the disassembly. With all the work done to the engine, let's conduct another leak down test to see if I have resolved the issue. Brilliant. Less than 20% leakage, which is in the green and is a very good result. All that's left to do is to set the valve clearances. I'm applying a nice coat of lacquer to the rocker cover just so we can keep the aluminium look without running the risk of it oxidizing. The final few steps of the engine rebuild can continue. I fitted new seals and bearings into this plate. As I definitely don't want to paint any of the ignition system, now is a great time to give the engine its top coat. A few days have passed and the paint has now cured, so I can continue with the rebuild. I'm now fitting the ignition system, and this does need to be done in a certain way. Basically, the points need to start opening when the piston is just coming up to top dead centre, about 1/8 of an inch from the top. Although it's very difficult to see on camera, everything is timed and the flywheel can be fitted. I've painted and fitted the engine cowling, and with that in place I can now fit the engine kill switch. There's only a few parts that need to be restored before the engine is finished. Firstly, we have the engine pull start cup, which is fitted with 3 Allen screws. And then we have a particularly vital component, the carburettor. I'm actually using the carburettor off the first engine which I got, because the second engine's carburettor does not look very good at all. So let's take a look at this one. There is some rust in there, that is really to be expected, especially when you consider what it looked like inside the engine, but it's really not too bad. So I'm going to get this all cleaned up and hopefully it's going to be perfectly usable. Luckily I do have a replacement bowl gasket as well. Firstly, I'm giving the whole carburettor a preliminary clean with some carb spray. After that, it's going into the ultrasonic cleaner. In case anybody's wondering, this is just simply hot water mixed with a bit of washing up liquid or dish soap. After around half an hour of cooking in the ultrasonic cleaner, the carburettor is looking much cleaner. The next step is to dry off the parts with some compressed air. After another quick spray with some cleaner, the carburettor is now ready to reassemble. To clean up the rust inside the bowl, I'm using a sandblaster. As you can see, that's made a big difference, but for obvious reasons I did not want to blast it too aggressively. With the carburettor clean and rebuild finished, it can now be fitted to the engine. As I've done with all the other rusty components, I've sandblasted the exhaust manifold. As exhaust manifolds have a tendency to get quite hot, I've actually painted this one in stove paint, so very high temperature. There is one last hurdle that we need to get over before we can test the engine, and that is the fuel tank. Now initially I thought this was in quite good condition, but after a closer inspection it does have a few perforations. So what I'm doing here is removing the paint, then I'll roughen up the surface with the sandblaster. I can then weld up the holes and then powder coat it in red. After 15 minutes in the powder coating oven, the fuel tank looks brand new. The engine takes Castrol XL oil, I put a pint in and then use a dipstick to get the correct amount. As with all my restorations, in goes a brand new spark plug. I just need to make a quick guard for the pull start cup on the flywheel. As I don't have a metal bender which can fold this thickness of metal, I'm just going to heat it up and then use the vise. With the metal bent into the desired shape, a hole is drilled so it can be clipped onto the engine cover, and also a small piece of tube is welded to the bottom so it can actually be bolted on. A quick coat of primer and then top coat just to make it look good, and then it's ready to fit. This particular engine is from an Allen scythe. As I have also restored the scythe, this is a great time to demonstrate the engine. The engine runs perfectly. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. If you have enjoyed this video, then please do remember to like and also subscribe. Until the next restoration, see you again soon. Bye for now.